When my son told me to move to a nursing home, I didn't say a word. I just smiled and looked down at my hands. They were shaking a little. Maybe from age, maybe from the weight of that moment. We were sitting at the dinner table that evening. The food was warm, but the air felt cold. Ethan, my only son, was looking anywhere but at me. His wife, Claire, had her arms crossed, eyes fixed on her phone. "Mom," he began softly, "Claire and I think it's time you moved somewhere where you can be taken care of properly. You know, a nursing home." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "A nursing home?" I repeated, almost whispering. He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "You'll be comfortable there. They'll take good care of you. And you'll have people your own age to talk to." People my own age. The word stung more than I expected. I looked around the house, my home. The walls I painted with my late husband. The table where Ethan used to sit and do his homework. The chair where I used to knit while waiting for him to come home from college. Everything in that room had a story. My story. His story. And now, suddenly, I was being asked to leave it all behind. Claire spoke next, her voice calm but firm. "It'll be better for all of us, really. You'll have more care there, and we can focus on the baby. You know how things have been." The baby? Yes, I knew. My grandson was 3 months old, and I loved him more than anything. But lately, I barely got to hold him. Every time I offered to help, Claire would say she had it under control. I looked back at Ethan. "Is this what you really want?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "It's what's best for everyone, Mom." Best for everyone. Except me. That night, I sat in my room with the light off, staring out the window. The moonlight spread across the garden where I used to play with Ethan when he was little. I remembered how he used to hold my hand and say, "Mom, I'll never leave you." I smiled sadly at the memory. Children mean those words when they're young. They just forget as they grow up. The next morning, I started packing. I didn't want to make things hard for them. I folded my clothes neatly one by one, and placed them in the small suitcase I used when my husband and I went on our first trip together. I came across an old photo of the three of us, me, Ethan, and his father, standing in front of this very house. I held it close to my chest and whispered, "You'd know what to do, James. You'd never let this happen." I didn't cry. Not yet. As I zipped up the bag, Rosa knocked on the door. Rosa was our maid, or as I like to call her, the only person who still sees me. She was in her 40s, kind-hearted, with eyes full of warmth. She had been working for us for nearly 6 years. "Mrs. Hale," she said softly, "is everything okay? You're packing." I nodded with a small smile. "Ethan thinks it's time I moved out." Her eyes widened. "Out? But why? This is your house." "Not anymore," I said. "It's theirs now. I don't want to be a burden." Rosa shook her head. "You could never be a burden." That made my heart ache a little. No one had said that to me in years. Later that evening, I heard Ethan talking to Claire in the living room. His voice was low, but I caught enough. "She took it better than I thought," he said. Claire replied, "It's for the best. We need our own space." Their words cut deeper than they knew. But I didn't want to argue. I had learned long ago that silence sometimes speaks louder than tears. When I came out with my bag, Ethan looked nervous. "Mom, I'll come visit every weekend," he said. I smiled gently. "Don't worry, dear. I understand. You have your life now." Claire forced a polite smile. "The nursing home is lovely. You'll make friends there." I didn't answer. Rosa helped me carry the bag to the car. When we reached the gate, she stopped and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "If you ever need anything, Mrs. Hale, please call me." I touched her hand. "Thank you, Rosa. You've always been kind." As the car drove away, I watched the house grow smaller in the rearview mirror. Every brick, every window, every flower in the garden seemed to wave goodbye. I thought about the years I spent building that home, the laughter, the dinners, the birthdays. And now, all of it belonged to someone else. When we reached the nursing home, everything smelled of medicine and disinfectant. The nurse showed me my new room. It was small, with a single bed and a window overlooking a gray courtyard. "Make yourself comfortable," she said. I nodded, setting my bag on the bed. But how do you make yourself comfortable in a place that doesn't hold a single memory of love? That night, as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, maybe this is what getting old feels like, being forgotten in the very life you helped build. A tear slipped down my cheek, and for the first time in years I didn't stop it. I closed my eyes and thought of Rosa's kind face. Somehow, deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. Something in my heart told me that life still had one lesson left to teach me. One final chapter one wasn't expecting. The first few days at the nursing home passed in silence. Every morning, the same faint smell of bleach hung in the air. The same nurse knocked on my door, reminding me about breakfast. The same quiet shuffle of old slippers echoed in the hallways. I tried to smile at the other residents, but most of them kept to themselves. Some looked lost, others were simply waiting for something, someone, or maybe for nothing at all. The food was bland. The chairs were stiff. But what hurt the most wasn't the loneliness. It was the thought that my son hadn't called. Every time the phone at the front desk rang, I hoped it was him. But it never was. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the rain, a soft knock came at the door. It was Rosa. She was holding a small paper bag. "Mrs. Hale," she said, smiling gently, "I couldn't stop thinking about you. I brought you some homemade soup." My heart lifted for the first time in days. "Oh, Rosa," I said, "you didn't have to do that." She shrugged. "I wanted to. You always cared for everyone. Someone should care for you too." We sat together while I ate. The soup was warm, comforting. It tasted like home. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I hid them behind a smile. "Do you like it here?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "It's peaceful. But peace can feel empty when it's forced." She nodded, understanding without me having to explain. "I know it's not my place, but Ethan shouldn't have sent you here." I looked down at my hands. He's young. He has a family. Maybe he just forgot what it feels like to be someone's child. That night, after Rosa left, I sat up for a long time thinking. Her visit reminded me of something I hadn't felt in weeks: warmth. The next morning, I decided to call Ethan. The nurse handed me the phone, and I dialed his number slowly. When he picked up, his voice sounded rushed. "Mom, everything okay?" I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "Yeah, I've been meaning to call," he said, distracted. I could hear the baby crying in the background. "It's just been busy. You know how it is." "I understand," I said softly. "How's the baby?" "He's good. Growing fast." "That's wonderful." There was a small pause before I added, "Ethan, do you ever miss home?" He sighed. "Of course, Mom. But this was the right decision. You're being taken care of, right?" "Yes," I replied. "They take good care of me." It was a lie, but not the kind that hurts anyone. It was just easier that way. Before hanging up, I said, "I love you, Ethan." He paused for a second. "Love you too, Mom," he said quickly before the line went silent. I sat there for a while, the receiver still in my hand, the hum of the disconnected line buzzing softly in my ear. That evening, I walked through the courtyard. It was small but peaceful. A few benches, some dying flowers, a fountain that barely worked. An old man was feeding breadcrumbs to a pigeon. When he saw me, he smiled. "First week here?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. It's different." He chuckled. "They always say we'll get used to it. I've been here 2 years, still waiting for that day." His laugh faded, replaced by a sigh. "My daughter lives 20 minutes away. Says she'll visit soon. She's been saying that for 8 months." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, and he looked at me with kind eyes. "You look like a woman who gave a lot," he said. "Don't let the world convince you that giving was your mistake." His words stayed with me long after I went to bed. The next morning, Rosa came again. "I asked the manager if I could visit you on weekends," she said with a smile. He agreed. "You don't have to trouble yourself," I said, but inside I felt grateful. "It's no trouble," she replied. "You remind me of my mother. She passed away years ago. Being here, it feels like being close to her again." Her kindness touched me more than she knew. Days turned into weeks, and Rosa kept coming. She brought small things, a warm blanket, cookies, a little plant for my window. Every time she came, I felt less forgotten. Sometimes she would tell me about her own struggles. How hard it was to pay rent. How she dreamed of sending her son to college. I would listen, and in a strange way, it made me feel alive again. To care about someone else's story. Then one evening, she said something that made me pause. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "did you know Ethan offered to sell the house?" I looked at her, my breath catching for a moment. "Sell it? But that's our home." She nodded slowly. "He told the agent last week. He said it's too big for them." For a moment I couldn't speak. The thought of strangers walking through my rooms, touching the walls I had painted with my husband's hands. It broke something deep inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Maybe this was life's way of teaching me to let go. Or maybe it was teaching me something else entirely. That sometimes love has to take a different shape before it can truly be seen. As I closed my eyes, one thought echoed in my mind. He may have taken my home, but he would not take my heart. Weeks passed, and with each one, the silence from my son grew louder. He didn't call anymore. Not even a short message. At first, I tried to make excuses for him. Maybe work was busy, maybe the baby was sick, maybe life had just swallowed him whole. But deep down I knew. He was moving on. And I was slowly becoming a memory. Rosa, though, never stopped showing up. Every weekend, she'd bring her gentle smile and the smell of fresh bread or lavender soap. The moment she entered the room, it felt like sunlight cutting through a long winter. One morning, she helped me sit near the window, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. "You should get some sunlight," she said softly. "You look pale." I smiled. "Sunlight doesn't visit me as much as it used to." She chuckled a little, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then I'll bring it to you." I laughed quietly, but there was truth in her words. Rosa had become the only light in my dull days. She'd tell me stories about her little boy. How he drew stars on the kitchen wall. How he said he'd buy her a big house one day. And every time she spoke, I felt something stir inside me. The warmth of motherhood I had almost forgotten. Sometimes I'd think back to when Ethan was small. How he'd hold my hand while we crossed the street. How he used to bring me daisies from the garden and say, "Mom, these are for your smile." Now he didn't even remember to ask if I'd eaten. One Sunday afternoon, I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. It was Ethan. For a moment, my heart leapt. I straightened my blanket, brushed my hair, and waited. But when he walked in, I saw it. The uneasiness in his eyes. He wasn't here out of love. He was here out of duty. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice stiff. "How are you feeling?" "I'm managing," I said softly. "It's good to see you." He nodded but didn't smile. He kept looking at his watch, as if the seconds were more precious than our time together. "I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable," he said. "Claire's been asking if you needed anything." "I've fine," he replied. "The staff is kind. And Rosa visits often." His eyebrows twitched. "Rosa? The maid? She's been very thoughtful," I said. "She brings food and she listens." He gave a short laugh, the kind that isn't really a laugh at all. "Mom, she works for us. You don't have to pretend she's family." His words hit me like a quiet slap. I took a deep breath. "Ethan, kindness doesn't need a bloodline." He didn't answer. He just nodded again and stood up. "Well, I have to go. The baby's nap time." "Of course," I whispered. "Thank you for coming." He left before I could say another word. When the door closed, the silence in the room grew so thick it almost felt like a wall. That night, Rosa came by again. She noticed my red eyes right away. "He came today, didn't he?" I nodded. "He did. For a few minutes." She sighed and sat beside me. "You gave him everything, didn't you?" "Everything I could," I said, my voice trembling. "And now I'm just trying to understand where I went wrong." Rosa took my hand gently. "You didn't go wrong. Sometimes people forget the love that raised them when comfort blinds them. But deep down they'll remember." Her words felt like a soft blanket over a cold heart. A few days later, I received a letter, not from Ethan but from the real estate company. It was an update on the sale of my house. My house. I read every line slowly, my hands shaking. It wasn't a home to him anymore. It was property. That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the photo on my bedside table. Ethan at his graduation, his arms around me, both of us smiling like the world belonged to us. Tears rolled down my cheeks, slow and silent. I whispered to that picture, "You used to love me once. What happened to that little boy?" When Rosa came the next morning, I told her about the letter. She frowned. "He didn't even ask you before selling it." I shook my head. "He doesn't see it as mine anymore. He thinks I'm done living. Just a chapter that's closed." She squeezed my shoulder. "You're still here, Mrs. Hale. You still have choices." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Choices. I still had choices. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks, the kind that reminded me of my husband, Robert. He used to say sunsets were proof that endings could be beautiful too. And as I watched that slow fading light, something inside me began to shift. Maybe I couldn't bring back my son's love. Maybe I couldn't make him remember the mother who stayed up all night when he was sick, or who saved every birthday card he ever made. But I could still choose how this story ended. I didn't want my final chapter to be about being forgotten. I wanted it to be about giving, one last time, but this time, to someone who truly understood its value. That night, before going to bed, I wrote in my journal. Just one sentence. "If love cannot return to me, I will let it live where it's needed most." I didn't yet know what that would mean, but I could feel it. Something was about to change. The next morning felt different. I woke up before the nurses came in, before the sound of breakfast trays echoed through the hallway. The air felt heavy, but clear, like the quiet before a big storm. I sat up slowly and reached for my journal again. My hands trembled a little, but I knew what I wanted to write. I wrote down Rosa's name, her son's, and their small address I had memorized from the stories she'd shared. She once told me they rented a tiny apartment above a grocery store, just 2 rooms, with thin walls and a leaky ceiling. Yet when she spoke of it, her eyes always glowed, like she was describing a palace. That image stayed in my mind as I dressed and called for a taxi. The nurse tried to stop me, said I wasn't supposed to leave without permission, but I just smiled and told her it was a short visit. In truth, it was more than that. It was a decision I had been waiting to make for months, maybe even years. When I arrived at Rosa's apartment, I knocked gently on the old wooden door. A little boy opened it, Mateo, her son. He was holding a small toy car and looking at me with curious eyes. "Hello," I said softly. "Is your mama home?" He nodded and called out, "Mama, the nice lady is here." Rosa came rushing from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression shifted from surprise to worry. "Mrs. Hale, you shouldn't be out like this. You could have called, I would have come." I smiled faintly. "I wanted to see where the sunlight you carry lives." She looked confused but smiled anyway, helping me sit on their old sofa. The cushions were worn, but everything smelled clean, a mix of soap, bread, and warmth. "I don't have much to offer," she said. "Would you like some tea?" "I'd love that." She poured tea into mismatched cups and sat across from me. Her son climbed onto her lap, still playing with his toy. I watched them for a moment. The way she kissed the top of his head. The way he leaned into her without hesitation. It reminded me of the days when Ethan was small, when love was simple and pure. "Rosa," I began after a pause. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "If you had a home of your own, one with a garden, maybe even a room for Mateo to paint his stars, what would that mean to you?" Her eyes widened slightly, and her voice trembled when she spoke. "It would mean everything. But dreams like that are for other people, Mrs. Hale. Not for us." I smiled gently. Sometimes dreams just need someone to believe in them. She looked at me quietly, her brow furrowed as if she didn't understand what I meant. But I didn't explain, not yet. I wanted her to feel the weight of hope before the surprise. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, laughing even. She showed me some of Mateo's drawings. Uneven lines of blue skies, bright suns, and stick figure families holding hands. In one of them he had drawn 3 people, a woman, a boy, and an older lady. When I asked who that was, he said, "That's you, Mrs. Hale. You're like Grandma." Something in my chest broke open right then, not with pain but with warmth. That simple, innocent word meant more than any apology or expensive gift my own son could have given. When I returned to the nursing home that evening, I felt calm, clearer than I had in a long time. I called my lawyer the next morning and asked him to come by. He was surprised to hear from me. "Mrs. Hale, I thought you'd left these matters to your son?" "Not anymore," I said quietly. "I still have my own heart, and I'd like to use it while it still beats." When he arrived, I sat with him at the small table by my window. I told him exactly what I wanted. I wanted the house, my old house, the mansion that held my memories, my laughter, and my love, to go to Rosa and her son. I wanted it to be theirs, free and clear, with enough funds to maintain it comfortably. He hesitated. "Are you sure, Mrs. Hale? That's a very large gift." "Yes," I said. "Because what good is a mansion full of empty rooms? I'd rather it be filled with laughter again." As he drew up the papers, I thought of Ethan. A part of me still ached, still wished he would walk through that door and call me Mom with love again. But another part of me knew. Love cannot be forced. It has to flow freely, like sunlight through an open window. When everything was signed, I asked my lawyer to deliver the documents to Rosa personally. I didn't want to see her confusion, or hear her thank me. I wanted her to discover it quietly, naturally, the same way kindness had found me through her. That evening, I sat watching the sky again. The clouds drifted lazily across the fading sun. I whispered, "Robert, I hope I did the right thing." In my heart, I could almost hear his voice, calm, deep, reassuring. "You did what love would do." I smiled softly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt alive again, not because I had given away something grand, but because I had given with meaning. Somewhere across town, Rosa would soon open an envelope that would change her life forever. She'd cry, I knew she would. But her tears would be the good kind. The kind that water new beginnings. And maybe, just maybe, those walls that once echoed with my memories would soon hold laughter again. For me, that was enough. A few days later, the sun was bright, and the air carried that quiet peace only mornings can bring. I was sitting by the window again, wrapped in my favorite shawl, when the nurse came in holding a small bouquet of flowers. "These just arrived for you," she said with a smile. "No note, just your name on the card." The flowers were wild, daisies, sunflowers, a few roses, and sprigs of lavender. Not the kind of bouquet you'd buy from a fancy shop, but the kind someone would pick themselves with love. I knew instantly who they were from. I held them close, breathing in their scent. There was something pure about them, unpolished, real, honest. Just like Rosa and her son. Later that afternoon, the front desk called. They said a woman and a little boy were here to see me. My heart skipped a beat. When they walked in, I saw Rosa holding Mateo's hand. He was dressed in a clean blue shirt, his hair combed neatly, and in his other hand, he held a small box tied with string. Rosa looked at me with tears already in her eyes. "Mrs. Hale," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you do something like this?" I smiled softly. "Because you reminded me what home is supposed to feel like." She shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't deserve something so big." "Yes, you do," I said. "You gave me kindness when I had nothing to give back. You didn't treat me like a patient or an old woman. You treated me like family. And that means more than any mansion ever could." She came closer and hugged me, tight, warm, and sincere. It had been so long since someone had held me like that. I felt her gratitude, her love, her disbelief, all in that one embrace. Then Mateo walked up, his little hands clutching the small box. "I made this for you," he said shyly. I untied the string and opened it. Inside was a tiny clay heart, uneven and cracked at the edges, painted red with a few fingerprints still visible. On it he had written in crooked letters, "Thank you, Grandma." That broke me completely. I cried. Not the quiet kind this time, but the full kind, where every tear carries both pain and peace. I held that little heart in my palm and whispered, "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." They stayed for tea. We laughed, talked, and for the first time, the silence around me didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive, filled with connection. After they left, I sat watching the evening sky again. The golden light spilled across the floor like it used to in my old living room. I could almost imagine Rosa there, opening the curtains every morning, letting that same light touch the walls. I thought about Ethan. I wondered if he'd ever understand why I did what I did. Maybe one day he would drive past that house and see children playing in the yard, flowers blooming in the garden, and he'd remember what that home once meant. Maybe then he'd understand that love isn't about possession, it's about presence. I didn't need his apology anymore. I just wished him peace, wherever he was. In that quiet moment, I realized something profound. We spend so much of our lives trying to hold on to people, to things, to memories. But sometimes, the only way to truly keep them is to let them go. That night, before I went to bed, I placed Mateo's clay heart on my bedside table. I touched it once and smiled. Home, I whispered, was never the mansion. It was always here. The next morning, the nurse found me sitting peacefully in my chair, my shawl draped neatly around me, a faint smile still on my face. The sunlight had just begun to spill through the window, warming the little clay heart that rested beside me. And though I was gone, my story didn't end there. Because somewhere, in that old mansion, laughter filled the halls again. Rosa's voice echoed as she called her son to dinner. The scent of bread and hope lingered in the air. And every morning, when sunlight poured through the same windows that once watched me fade, it touched new lives, lives built on kindness, gratitude, and love that keeps giving, even after goodbye. That was my true legacy, not the mansion, not the money, but the love that refused to die. Sometimes, the heart finds its home not in walls or wealth, but in the people who remind us what it means to be human. And in that truth, I finally found peace.